Now, for the next two segments, we're going to focus on the law and major legal stories that are in the news. And I want to start by introducing our panel. You know these guys. Jim Kousouros, criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, sitting on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Associations. He also frequently lectures at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York City. And he is a former prosecutor from New York City as well. Mayo Bartlett is an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLC, former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit, the Westchester County DA's office. And I want to get in first, guys, with the topic I just ended with, which was with the coronavirus and whether or not violating a quarantine could get you in trouble with the law. This is what the CDC had to say about it because it came up today. Quote, isolation for public health purposes may be voluntary or compelled by federal, state, or local public health departments. Now, a situation in Missouri takes us beyond the theoretical because it could be a test case about quarantines and the law. After a college student returned from Italy, she felt sick and tested positive for the virus. Then, health officials told the entire family, you need to self-quarantine. However, the father took another one of his daughters to a school dance 2 days later. The dad, then admonished by the county health department, who told him that the family is required to stay home, quote, by the force of law. And obviously the school has since closed their doors and all the rest. Jimmy, is it at this point a recommendation if you've been told that you could be a contagion and you choose to say, yeah, whatever, are you just going to say don't do it again? Or could you face criminal or civil penalties?
Well, right now, it's all voluntary for the most part. And if it's voluntary and you break it, there can be no criminal or civil penalties. Now, you know, you can be prosecuted for knowingly transmitting the virus or a disease. But when it comes to the quarantine, a state or local or federal government can direct by force of law that you remain in quarantine, but they have to follow certain procedures in order to do that. And if they follow those procedures and you violate the quarantine, you can be prosecuted. This is not the way anybody wants to go.
Right.
But on the other hand, you cannot have situations where people aren't abiding by the request. It's going to be followed by a directive and a legal directive, and it can be enforced.
And then there's an interesting dynamic with, and I was thinking of this today, if you're a state official in this particular case, you know, do you mention this, you know, publicly admonish this person? I mean, there's a danger that's attached to it, but on the same end, unless that there is a real scarlet letter attached to you, people may do this. Now, Mayo, we talked about the criminal, and that it's not just the federal government who can decide. You can have state officials and local officials too, right?
Yes.
That can decide. Okay, because we've seen before enforced curfews, et cetera, where if you violate this. Okay, what about civilly? I'm just thinking if I went to that kid's school, and it's not that the father didn't know. Now, there's variations of the story, but for this one, let's assume he knew full well that he was a health risk and chose to ignore it. If somebody else gets sick, or somebody, let's say a parent that's there is forced to miss work and they don't have paid family leave and they're losing literally a paycheck here, is there any civil recourse for people if they're harmed by somebody who's not acting responsibly?
Well, I think that you have a couple of hurdles. Number one, you're going to have to show that that person was at a minimum negligent and that that person should have known basically that they were exposing someone else to this type of
hypothetically, Mayo, if they were told by the health department, right, you have a contagious member in your family circle, you all need to stay within the confines of your home here, and they chose to disregard it, let alone go into a public place here, isn't that there's culpability? I mean,
it may be, because the thing that you're going to have to do as a plaintiff is be able to show that that person's a proximate cause, that they're the reason that you got sick. And in a situation like this where you have so many people out there who may actually have coronavirus, it's going to be difficult to pinpoint that one individual as the transmitter.
Well, where's the source? Okay. Where do you see potentially this going from the legal perspective, Jim? Because I've been spending so much time talking about from the medical perspective and from the from the communication side, what needs to be done, and we're changing our ways of life. But I'm now thinking, forget the economic, from the legal perspective, to enforce people to abide by these things? I mean, we already know if people are trying to do price gouging, there'll be the force of law will be brought down. But where else do you see the law getting involved in this?
Well, we don't see it yet, but you have the situation in Italy where essentially the entire country is shut down, and that was expanded today. If we get to the point where that type of action needs to be taken, then that's where the law is going to get involved. You're going to have a quarantine, it's going to be by force of law, and it's going to need to be enforced. But I have to tell you,
and
if
the
we get to that
restrictions on
point,
civil liberties that people say, oh, well, that would never happen here. We saw in China, literally 100 million people were quarantined, and we said that'll never happen in the Western world. Now, as you said, in Italy, with the exception of a pharmacy or a supermarket, you can't leave the house. So it's beyond comprehension.
But if we get there, I mean, you got to just think about it. If we get there, you're going to want to abide by it, because we're only going to get there.
And I'm glad you made that point, because in Italy, one of the things, and listen, I'm half Italian, but people thought culturally, Italians don't like to follow rules, okay?
Right.
I'll say that, but they've all bought in. And while people don't like it, people describing in horrific terms what's going on, they're abiding by the restrictions.
How could you not?
And I think the human capacity has that, but it's who shall decide, where's the limits, for how long, how does it all work? This is such a moving target. Okay, when we come back, guys, a major day today as it relates to Harvey Weinstein, sentencing day. Will the disgraced movie mogul spend the rest of his life in prison? We'll talk about the sentence he got, and we'll ask the guys at the table where it goes from here.